My name is Justin Edgar. This is Kevin Hamako. I'm going to do a presentation on breach preparedness today. The outcome of this is to kind of demystify some of the necessities behind incident response. We know that in a lot of public sector customers, we find that there's a limitation that goes beyond kind of alert triage and a lot of a risk acceptance beyond that point, right? We don't typically get into instrumenting and manning ourselves to perform incident response. So hopefully the output of this conversation today will be a little bit of confidence around what it might take, some initial steps to do some incident response yourself, and some understanding of the requirements both from a procedural, instrumentation, and manning perspective. We'll keep it conversative. If you guys have questions as we go through, please feel free to interrupt and ask. I don't mind. We are a little short, so we'll push through some of these slides quickly, and what may suffer at the end is the Q&A period and time. So again, feel free to interject if you have a question as we move forward, or throw vegetables as necessary.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Kevin Hamako with DHS, Homeland Security Investigations in San Diego. I'm with our Cyber Intrusion group. Just a little bit of my background. I was in counterproliferation ops for about 5 or 6 years with DHS in San Diego. And then prior to that, I was with Air Force Office of Special Investigations for about 6 years.
I'm Justin Edgar. I'm a vendor. Boo, yes, I know. I've been with the FireEye Mandiant team for over 4 years now. Started on the product consulting side, focusing on host-based investigation and response, and then moving into SIEM-based investigation response as well, and then moved to the eventual dark side, and now am a sales engineer. I'm an EY alum for a very brief period of time, and prior to that I was an Army veteran. Spent 8 years in, not on the cyber side myself. I'm a daddy, husband, and you can see some pictures of the 3 daughters, no sons, that I have that keep me busy. So again, kind of bottom line up front, right? Standard military protocol. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you what I told you. Again, we're going to talk about incident response today, and I want you to come away confident, that it's an achievable goal. We do not see these capabilities being employed in the public sector or education sector very frequently. So hopefully we can take a little bit of the fear around that out of the picture. Understanding, again, the complexities of public sector, we know that skill sets are probably going to be the hardest things to gain, maintain, retain, etc. The rotating door. So when we talk about incident response, we're going to kind of preface that with instrumentation first, get you to the point where third-party intervention in your environment, third-party incident response is more capable, is more achievable, and then talk about some of the best ways you can bring some of your local security team or your local IT operational team up to speed to perform some of those functions themselves. So let's start with the attackers. Right? Your instant response is based upon the attackers in our environment. Not all breaches are created the same. A ransomware breach is very convenient because we know exactly every machine that's infected, and we know exactly what we have to do to remediate. Pay with money packs or PayPal or whatever. On the other side of the spectrum are those advanced attacks. Attacks that we typically don't find, that we typically don't understand or target against us unless we take a hard look at our data and compare that to attacker methodologies and attacker outcomes, right? What type of people are targeting the data they have in my environment? In a lot of cases, we find people say, I don't have any valuable data in my environment. However, things like PII, HIPAA data, proprietary internal processes, backwards and sideways access into law enforcement or ICS environments are common reasons that advanced attackers do penetrate public sector and education style accounts. Another thing to consider during investigation is whether or not I'm going to have attribution. If this is an internal incident, the data collection process, the way that I do e-discovery and collect data in that environment is much different than if I'm expecting the other end of the connection to be in a foreign country, right? With non-extradition treaty laws, we're never going to get them. The output of my investigation needs to be a scoped incident so I can do effective remediation. That has a very different color when it comes to data collection, and we'll talk through some of that as we move forward. And then finally, the prosecution part, right? Even an internal threat, an insider attack doesn't always come with prosecution. Again, that affects our means of data collection. I don't have to do data collection that facilitates review by law enforcement in a way, in a manner, the collection and investigation they understand. Instead, I can expedite if there's no law enforcement or prosecution involved with the case. This should be relatively familiar to most people in the security field. So this is a typical way that an attack takes place. Starting at the left with the earliest stage of an attack when we're performing reconnaissance, and ending up with a mission complete, data leaving the environment. And in between, there's things they have to do. They have to find out who they're going to attack, figure out a way to get in, and then get around. Right? That's really what it comes down to when we talk about the attacker lifestyle. Or lifestyle. I don't know what their lifestyle is. I hope it's great. Life cycle. And here below we see some of the different types of things we look for along each step of that attacker life cycle. Excuse me. No big surprise here, right? I think we've seen these slides and slides like these many times before. What may be different is the stats. Almost 70% of the time, and this goes back to Mandiant, the services arm of FireEye, in 70% of the breaches they investigate, the initial investigation was queued from third-party notification. Three-letter agency knocking on the door and saying, hey, your data is not where it's supposed to be, or you have active communication to a known bad place. You might want to do something about that, right? So that puts most of us here. If you think about that, statistically speaking, when you are breached, and we assume breach is inevitable, let's say a when, not if. You're going to be on the trailing side, right? The indicators you receive from third-party notification are going to tell you that things are going out, that data has left, that bad guys are in and are communicating with command and control infrastructure. So you're really going to be behind the power curve. This obviates the need for historical data collection and reference capabilities. It also shows us how hard it's going to be to catch up. Right? If we look at a median time from find to fix of 205 days, they've probably been there for 200 days. They probably have compromised administrative credentials. They've compromised key points in the environment. They probably know your network better than you do. And expecting an instant response company or instant response capability from a third party to come in and tell that story becomes very, very difficult without the application of historical data. To that end, I brought Kevin in from DHS, who is much more familiar with both the means that they obtain this intelligence they provide, as well as the mechanisms by which they communicate that to the customers. So Kevin can help explain that much better than I can.
So I'll just take us through a little bit of a common scenario, and kind of the most common scenario where we as investigators would be providing a third-party notification to either you or someone you might work with. So typically, if we're assisting a victim with incident response, or we could be coming into the victim after they finish incident response, and they're basically handing us maybe a completed report from a third-party incident response company, or like a PFI report in purchase card industry cases. So whether we're coming into the incident while it's happening or getting the information from the victim after they've finished their incident response process, what will happen usually is one of the main outputs of that is we'll identify adversary infrastructure, whether it's a domain that a piece of malware in their environment is calling out to, or an IP address. So what we'll do is we try to triage and go through those indicators and see, out of these indicators, are any of them located in the US where we could serve court process, or are they located in countries where we might be able to get the same information through whatever kind of bilateral relationship we have with that country. So the output of the court order is typically, it's going to be either historical net flow, if the provider has that, or we could get an order to provide future net flow. And one of the common scenarios is we'll identify at a victim, a piece of malware is calling out to a domain somewhere. That domain is sitting on a VPS, rented by the bad guy. So we'll be getting traffic to and from the VPS, where we'll see the bad guys logging into the VPS, starting to attack other victims. So that's really where we get to start seeing other possible victims and notifying them. Because if we have historical or current net flow for a piece of bad guy infrastructure, we're seeing obviously not just the communications to the victim we've already identified, but if we see that infrastructure starting to talk to other endpoint or to other environments, we might start seeing, okay, well, this is a different victim we need to notify. do some research on, who else the infrastructure is reaching out to. And then when we do that victim notification, we're able to provide whatever IOCs that we've observed previously in the investigation, just to bring them up to speed on what we're seeing. We'll try to give them as much background on the adversary as we can. Sometimes we can't provide all the information about what we know about a threat actor, but we try to rely on open source as much as possible, because a lot of the groups we work with, there's published open source on. And then we'll also try to give them some information about what tactics that adversary was using at previous victims to try to help them identify them in their environment as well. So with that, just a little bit of background on kind of the what and why in incident response. So really the what, from our perspective, is tell a complete story about what happened during the breach, getting the artifacts that are necessary to explain, how did the bad guy get in, what do they do, what were their goals, how you can prevent those breaches in the future, make logical connections between different systems in your environment that are compromised, and generate a full narrative of what happened, why it happened, when did it start, when did it end, to the best extent you can based on the artifacts that you can collect. And then a big why for a lot of the folks we work with is they're going to have not just internal requirements and kind of questions that they need answered, but there are going to be external requirements too based on your compliance regimes, other third parties that you're dealing with. If your infrastructure is starting to talk to other infrastructure that is consistent with bad guy activity, what external requirements do you have to communicate? And that's part of the incident scoping, kind of the whole procedure there. So a lot of compliance requirements, regulatory requirements to notify other folks. And then generally in the investigative lifecycle, Justin talked about kind of the attacker lifecycle. For us, what we see is, you're going to start out with whether it's an IDS alert, a third-party notification. You're going to have some sort of discrete data that you start out with that detects some sort of possible scenario in your environment. You're going to take that initial IOC, start looking into it further, determine, is this IOC present on any other systems in your environment? And then once you've kind of triaged that and determined other systems that you need to look into, start going into a more in-depth investigation of those possibly compromised hosts. And when you're doing that through live data collection or more in-depth memory analysis, you're going to be trying to develop more indicators that you can kind of use to start the process over again until you fully scope the incident and you can confidently say, okay, we started with detection, a single IOC or a single anomalous, factor we have to deal with. We've kind of triaged through our environment to determine all the systems that we can, went to those systems, pulled out as many IOCs as we can from the network side and also the host-based side. And then once you've done that and fully scoped the incident, then get into remediation. And then just a common scenario for a third-party notification, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but pretty common.
So we typically see that most customers I have an opportunity to interact with kind of stop here, right? You get to triage in most cases. You might identify a suspicious host, go nuke and pave, celebrate wildly, and move on to the next alert, right? We don't see a lot of this lather, rinse, repeat capability in the public sector when it comes to fully scoping an incident, right? Remediation follows scoping. And if we don't, we're playing whack-a-mole. Who's to say that the credentials on that machine that we just blew away weren't compromised and used elsewhere? And there's secondary or tertiary means of persistence. So we're going to walk through a quick scenario, kind of a hypothetical about the way that incident response is performed following that investigative lifecycle. And we're going to use this, customer X notification. Hey, thanks for playing. You guys have failed at security for the week. You guys are talking to www.badguy.com. Totally legit. The hows of this investigation, right? We talk about the lather, rinse, repeat, but that requires the ability to go out and collect data, zoom in on that data, perform in-depth analysis, derive from that data additional forensic artifacts of interest, apply those artifacts to our detection sources to find other machines that might have evidence of that on it, whether it's through logs, whether it's through host-based forensic capabilities, network forensics capabilities, detection appliances, et cetera. And that's how we get that data back in, right? One machine becomes 2 machines, becomes 4 machines, stays 4 machines. We find a complete list of credentials that are compromised. We reset those passwords and we turn off the lights on remediation weekend, blow those machines away, replace those accounts or change the passwords and move on, right? We do this in response to all alerts that really matter. So we come up with a few different kind of points of instrumentation and skill set to support that. This is kind of the bones of this presentation. The things that if you want to achieve baseline incident response are important to begin to at least consider, right? Instrumentation. We need to be able to apply indicators of compromise, preferably locally derived indicators of compromise, to both our network and our hosts. If I find a file that's bad, I can derive MD5s, file names, file paths, imports, exports, mutexes, etc. All these different pieces of forensic information that I can then apply to the environment to find different permutations of this particular tool or backdoor, this malicious piece of software. We do have to have some sort of instrumentation to support that. Same thing on the network side. I might see ports, protocols, encoding mechanisms, different types of network traffic I need to find in the environment, find other machines that are associated with this particular incursion. I have to have a way to apply indicators to my network traffic. I also need to be able to perform historical queries. I need to record proactively data that I can go back in time and review. Right? We know probably, statistically speaking, we're going to be on the tail end of detection. Things are going to have happened up to 205 days in the past that require us to go back to that point to categorically define what happened in our environment. Right? If we're not instrumented in a way that allows us to do so, we're going to throw up our hands. We might be able to do some live response data collection, or a third party may be able to do some data collection as well, but it's not going to be as effective. We're putting up roadblocks before we even begin the journey. Historical queries, and we'll talk about this in specific. You don't have to log everything to be effective at maintaining logs that are relevant for incident response. This is why we find a lot of people that say, yeah, I have a SIM, I have logging capabilities, still don't have the data that really represents, a successful attempt to perform live response. The things that you maintain in a SIM to support operational management, network management, infrastructure management are not the same things that you need, or a partial set or a subset of the things that you need to maintain for incident response. And here are a few recommendations. And finally, we or someone else needs to be able to perform comprehensive network and host-based investigation. Those tools can potentially be brought in by a third party or by a state or federal entity to perform that investigation, or we can have those available to, one, support our local use, and then facilitate that data collection and examination by those third-party incident responders. On the skill set side, this I acknowledge is going to be the biggest challenge in the public sector. Again, that rotating door. I bring a dude up from college, he's an intern, I train him on all my stuff, I get him smart, and he goes chasing private sector dollars, right? Oopsie. This is a challenge. However, there are things we can do to start making guys smart, to get our operators understanding at least the processes and the means by which we analyze data, apply indicators in the environment. So on the network side, they should be able to derive network indicators. If I have an IP-based indicator, can I resolve that to a domain? Is that internal? Is it external? Is it RFC 1918 representing internal traffic? They should be able to understand that pretty easily. They should be able to do packet capture review. Wireshark's great. Lots of plugins for Wireshark. If I can capture packets, I can review those packets and derive additional network indicators. This is an attainable goal with regards to skill sets. On the host-based side, can I examine host-based forensic data? How am I collecting data? Am I doing it one-off? Am I doing it enterprise scale? Am I able to query the endpoint population for host-based artifacts, et cetera? People, then this is a hard one, getting people to understand what host-based forensics look like. And it's not particularly hard. I think there's a lot of cognitive bias against doing these type of forensics. But they start with easy things. What other files are in the directory I found this piece of malware in? What processes are running, and why are these anomalous? Right? Can I run Microsoft auto runs to find out what persistence mechanisms might be running on this machine? That's the basis that we build from to build these skill sets. And then deriving and applying indicators, right? If I find a piece of malware, how can I find that elsewhere? MD5s and file names are very brittle, so how can I derive indicators that are more resilient? What are the imports and exports for this? What's the mutex for this process? That might be relevant elsewhere. And then finally, intelligence. And we'll talk about this in the next scenario, but do I have open source intelligence capabilities or a community of intelligence that I can go to say, I found this domain, it might be bad, I don't know, it's not on VirusTotal, it's not an open source intelligence. How can I vet and get some domain reputation around this. And some of those are services, some of those are open source, some of that's free. Again, very attainable. So let's walk through a brief scenario. Now this is a little bit of an eye chart, so forgive me. We're going to start here and we're going to follow the arrows. We're going to follow Yellow Brick Road through this. And we're going to keep in mind kind of the investigative life cycle as we move through. So detection. In this case, we had our cheeky email from a 3-letter agency saying, you have somebody talking to badguy.com. Who's talking to badguy.com? What is badguy.com? Can I derive an IP? Can I derive multiple network indicators from badguy.com? I can go to RobTex, I can go to domain reputation services, I can go to, heck, I guess I could go to the site if I really wanted to, right? And from that, I get additional information. My investigation yields me an additional set of investigative artifacts that I can apply to the environment. So let's apply those to the environment. We take our indicators, drop those back into our detection mechanisms, and say, okay, who is talking to www.badguy.com? Who's talking to this IP address? Who else is potentially involved in this investigation and in this potential breach? We also take that and apply that to asset management. Who are our internal assets? What machines? Where are they located? And this is hard. It sounds easy, but I mean, ask yourself, do you really have a way to attribute perimeter network traffic to an individual host? A lot of cases that's not true, and it's kind of frightening, I'll be honest. But this is not, this is something that's simply stated, but difficult to obtain. And it's one of the more challenging things. You can do it through log, right? Do DHCP leases resolve to that individual host? Do I have asset management, or do I have a NAC solution that I can use as a categorical point of reference for assets in the environment? But going from here to here is critical. What machines are involved in this particular breach? From there, we have suspect hosts. We go to those hosts and find out more information. User accounts are highly valuable because how is lateral movement achieved? They exfiltrate the credentials, right? They use something like Mimikatz to pull credentials out of memory or to apply Kerberos tickets and move out laterally through the environment. Which user was involved in this? Simultaneously, do we have any other network forensics? Can we capture packet capture around destination machines destined for badguy.com into that IP address? And if we can, what's in them? What are the ports and protocols that are used? Is there any encoding? Is it in the clear? Is it illegitimate? Is this actually a false positive? Thanks for playing, guys, but badguy.com is actually one of our subsidiaries, and we communicate with them frequently. This all goes in the lather, rinse, repeat process, where we have users, we have machines, we have network indicators. Now we start walking through those. What are the logical connections we can make between them? Can we zoom in? I find a user. I zoom out. Where is that user logged on across the environment? Are they logged into the VPN? Are the GeoIP associated with that particular VPN login anomalous? Should they be in Brazil? Maybe. Maybe they're on vacation. Have they logged into a machine that had cached admin credentials? And now, as secondary and tertiary follow-on effects, I have administrative credentials that have been lost and have been released into the wild. Now I have a more systemic problem. Where have those credentials been used? Who should be using those? What machine should have those cached? That comes down to the investigation part. That part's not particularly hard, but the cognitive portion of that, making the logical connections between, I have a machine popped, and here I stop, I blow it away, great success. Or I actually go diving in and I derive some basic intelligence from that machine that allows me to say, yay or nay, this is a systemic problem. Can I blow this machine away and say, I trust the environment and I trust his credentials, or not? And finally, all this goes into a remediation plan. A collection of hosts, a collection of artifacts, indicators that have defined this problem in the network and host-based layers, potentially compromised accounts, etc. That becomes our remediation plan. Not the nuke and pave, that single machine that may or may not have generated this initial alert. So that's kind of the outcome, right? This part I don't see a lot happening. And I want to encourage you to at least instrument, and we'll talk about what that looks like now, some priorities potentially. Instrument, and then start training people to do this. Go beyond, responding fatalistically to every alert that we find to be legitimate, that we've triaged and found legitimate, and start performing some basic analysis on the host. Usernames and auth logs are a great place to start. So let's look at that. If we strip away all the specifics, we're really looking at different types of assets and different types of capabilities that are facilitating this process. One thing we don't see on here Anybody want to call me out? What's one capability that I have not included on this? Malware analysis, I've not included, right? And whether it's dynamic sandbox analysis or static, that'll be a conversation for another time. So these end up being capabilities. And we stack these capabilities up on enterprise-grade instrumentation. Kind of looks like this. We start with some logging. Logging lets us get network, when we want to log things like network transactions, it could be firewall logs, it could be kind of NetFlow Lite, et cetera. We want to be able to log asset attribution. Can we move from perimeter alert to internal machine attribution? We can use a SIM for that. We can use a NAC for that. We can use asset management for that. There's a variety of ways, but we'll keep it simple and say we can do that through logging. Absolutely. And auth logs, a simple way to begin the scoping exercise. If we lose an account, then we know that we can chase that account across the environment. That helps us scope based upon common threat actor TTPs. Detection, and by the way, if it's not clear, I put little stars where logging applies, right, to this process. Assuming that this is an accurate process, and you agree with me, if you start with logging, you can begin to affect these different points in the incident response lifecycle. You can start to build these capabilities. Detection. Detection goes beyond just the intel that we're fed from a vendor. Detection also applies to things we find in our environment. Brittle indicators, locally derived, are highly valuable. An MD5 coming from a third-party intel source is not very valuable. An MD5 from a file you found live in your environment, very brittle, but highly, highly valuable. So we use our detection capabilities to apply those indicators. It helps us scope these incidents. So detection, really here in the detection side, helps us scope. Intel feeds. Can I derive additional intelligence from the indicators I found? Something simple, right? A simple point for this one was, can I take a domain and derive an IP or IP range? That's valuable to me because I may not be able to search for domains in my NetFlow. I may not be able to search for domains in my firewall logs. That's pretty simple and easy to achieve. And then finally, on the more difficult side with regard to instrumentation is network and host-based forensics. Network forensics typically are some sort of PCAP, some sort of means to examine the contents of network traffic and do so in a historical manner, recording and maintaining that relevant traffic over time. Host-based forensics. Can I quickly collect data from a host to verify whether or not it's compromised? Can I apply indicators to those hosts? And can I do advanced live response data collection? Can I pull back things like file listings without going down to that host? That's again gets us onto the edge of advanced capabilities, but highly attainable, definitely doable, and I would say quite critical for effective scoping. Any questions here? I'm under 10 minutes, so I'm going to move kind of fast from here. So if you have any questions, I can go back to it as well.
So one of the things we're going through on my team right now is trying to build those skill sets into our team members. Like Justin mentioned, the critical skills that need to be present on your team to do this stuff repeatably and effectively. So on the host side, can your folks collect and analyze live data to start triaging the environment and determining where more in-depth collection analysis, maybe full RAM capture, even file system timelining and analysis might be appropriate. And then, of course, there's no substitute for experience, but one thing that we've used to great effect on our team is training from SANS Institute. It's definitely not cheap, but we found it's the most effective way to train our folks up. So some of the training we've been using on the host-based side is Forensics 508, which really covers a lot of this stuff very in depth. And then on the network forensics side, like Justin mentioned, the need to be able to collect and analyze NetFlow from your environment, also full packet capture where appropriate, aggregating what log sources you have, analyzing those, and then kind of at the higher level, like Justin briefly alluded to in terms of a more in-depth understanding of the malware you might be seeing. Can your folks do basic investigation of what protocols that malware is using to develop better IOCs locally that you can use to scope that incident? And then the course we've been using for our folks has been Forensics 572, which is really the counterpart to 508 on the advanced network forensics side. So that's the approach we've been taking.
Thanks, Kevin. So in summary, I would assert that establishing IR capabilities locally is an attainable goal. Now we can start with things, we can give you some recommendations here, start with some instrumentation, start with some lightweight training, and start performing this process internally. Move beyond triage, start attempting to scope an incident When there are challenges in instrumentation and skill set, let's attack those challenges, right? Let's bring a person up to speed. Let's bring on additional instrumentation to perform that task. And in worst case scenario, when we do have to pull in a third party, we have historical data as a reference. We have an ability to go back in time and facilitate that full-blown scoping exercise. Again, that's that short-term instrumentation. And then finally, skilled FTEs are a challenge. We acknowledge that. But we can start bringing people up to speed. We can start instrumenting processes and procedures, start building playbooks to support the lower level functions when it comes to intelligence derivation and application across an enterprise environment with regard to incident response. I think that, again, is very attainable. We shouldn't be scared of IR is the output here, right? If we're not doing it now because it seems hard, I think it's attainable. I think it's something we can do. That's the end of our presentation. We're up against time, and we're also up against lunch. So don't let me be the one to hold you from the chow line. Do we have any questions? Sir?
If we do the resources, you would say would be a good starting point for somebody wanting to learn this stuff that you're talking about.
Okay, so SANS courses are great. Nothing beats, the doing yourself, right? So again, vendor, sorry. We do offer a free tool through our website, which is a really great way for users to begin to analyze host-based forensics data. You go check out Redline. It's been available for years. It's something we provide for free. It allows you to do host-based forensic data collection as well as analysis in a GUI, right? You can kind of all do it in one place. So for users that are kind of getting spun up, free tools and applying those free tools to their own machines in order to understand what normal looks like is a great way to get started. On the network side, Wireshark is a great tool. It's free. There's no reason not to have analysts spending some time with these free tools to understanding what normal looks like. And then you can apply those same tools when you have these discrete breaches. The machines pop, even if it's commodity malware. Why not do data collection and find out what that looks like? Right? We know that something happened at a particular time. What happened around that time? What happened on the host? What happened on the network? What's happening now on the network? And what types of ports and protocols is this malware using to communicate? So on the active kind of freebie one and the participative style of experience gain, using free tools to perform this is something I think we can do. On the other side, there's a lot of great courses out there in all of this. There's also conferences around, but I'd recommend just the dive in. That's the way I learned. And that's the way I think is probably the best way to do it. Ask yourself questions, use some free tools, and investigate that way. Does that help? Or am I dancing around too much? Okay, cool. Any other questions? You almost raised your hand. Almost got you. Just kidding. Any other questions?
Can I get your a copy of that PowerPoint that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. Will the presentations be made?
It's actually on the app right now. I was looking at it while you were going through it.
Oh, excellent. If not, I'm Justin Edgar. That's justin.edgar@fireeye.com. Kevin's secret squirrel, so we probably won't give his away.
No, it's just kevin.hamako@dhs.gov. So.
Okay. Feel free to reach out to us. We'll be riding the vendor booth today as well if you have questions, but it looks like most of the content's available online. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Life's neat. Let's eat. Thank you.